2 more days. Is it feeling real yet, folks? The Ohio State opener is almost here. Saturday, 3:30 against Akron. If that means 2 days away. It's a Thursday, and I think we should do a 3 Things Thursday on the podcast daily. Yeah,
okay.
That's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. The 3 things are going to be 3 Buckeyes, and not just anyone, not plucking them out of thin air. 3 Buckeyes, Berm, who you really want to see get involved against Akron because you want to find out something. You want to see what they can bring, what it might look like as Ohio State's trying to build depth. So I don't want starters, and I don't want Jeremiah Smith.
Jeremiah Smith is a starter, so that's the same thing.
Okay, that's true. You got me counted on that one. That's a point for you. But just like somebody that you wouldn't project in the 2 deep, who might emerge, somebody who needs to get in the game in the second half, somebody that you want to see if there's the potential that this year they might help Ohio State.
I like these types of shows because I like this type of day, and I like the day that brings us closer to the football season because we have spent months talking about different players and prognosticating about different things and relaying different messages we hear and who's stepping up and who's standing out. And then we get to the season, and a lot of times all the things we hear mean squat because we get to the season and the coaches are like, yeah, you know what? All that stuff we said doesn't matter because we're just going to play the guys we always play. Which is hard to argue because the Buckeyes do, of course, win 90% or more of their football games. And so good for them. But there are certainly players on this roster. And I think it's more important than ever for Ohio State to play depth and to play youth with the knowledge of the length of the season, which has been a point we've belabored over and over. So I don't want to do too much there. But also just knowing everything that's moving on from this program for next season. I do not think you can handle this season the same way you've handled past ones because the expectation of, we'll have 18 guys back next year starting or even 12 guys back is just not there. So I really think Ohio State has to really lean into playing depth this season. And that's why for me, the first thing and the most important thing, and it may not seem like that big of a deal when you're talking about everything that Ohio State has on its roster, but the most important thing for me is Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry. And making sure, and I'm going to lump those 2 together, so that'll be one thing of the 3 things, but those 2 guys getting a lot of reps early and often and making an impact because we've talked so much about them. I'm obviously like head of the line of the Caden Curry fan club. The Kenyatta Jackson hype in the last year was very out of control, and then he did not really have a year that backed it up, but I also don't think he got a chance to really back it up. So I'm hoping that this weekend is the first time we get to see, and I guess I would put Mitchell Melton in that conversation as well, but probably not as much because I'm thinking about next year. I need Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson to have 20 plus snaps each in this game.
I don't want this to become a defensive line rotation question. This is not the way I mean it. Like Larry Johnson said last week that he viewed Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson also as starters. So we've seen that in years past. You've made that comparison as well to 2017. Those 4 defensive ends played roughly the same amount of snaps. I think really one of the issues where like 2021 or 2022, when it would be like annoying to watch Ohio State trying to play 4 defensive ends is that they were not all future NFL players. So I guess I'm asking, do you think that Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson are on the level? Do you believe what Larry Johnson is saying, that if he plays all 4 of them, that the production could match for all 4 of them?
I think they are, but we don't know, and that's the problem. We've heard so much about them both over the last 2 seasons and in preseasons and off seasons, but like now it's time to see if they can actually do it. When Caden Curry's been on the field, he makes plays. We know that. That's not even now. Generally speaking, he's been on the field against 2nd and 3rd teams, and it hasn't really mattered. I want to see him against starters. I don't even care if it's Akron starters. I want to see him out there and see if he can make an impact. The same goes with Kenyatta Jackson. You've put a lot of time into developing him. You put a lot of money into making sure that he stayed on this roster in this offseason. So you better go into this season believing that those 2 dudes are not just able to contribute in trash time and garbage time, but like you need to see those guys early. So to me, I've said it and you brought it up, like the 2017 defensive line is where I draw the comparison. Now that was a little different because you did have obviously the best defensive lineman in America and Nick Bosa. and then you had the next best off defensive lineman in America and Chase Young as a freshman that were involved in that rotation. But Chase really wasn't even playing much in 2017. So we can't, it was Tyquan Lewis. It was Sam Hubbard. It was, Jonathan Cooper. It was a team that had a lot of guys that I think were different types of players. And I think that's what you have now. I think that these guys are good enough to play, but we don't know. And it's time to see, because if they're not, then we need to know that Edric Houston's ready to move into Zots for next year, or that someone else is able to step up. So I just don't think this is a spot where you can dawdle and be like, we'll figure it out as the season goes along. It's got to happen now.
Yeah, and I think let's just stay with the Rushman. I think that's definitely true at defensive tackle as well. So I have talked a lot about Caden McDonald and the things that I've heard and some of the practices that we've seen, how high the ceiling I think can be for him at Ohio State. I'm ready to see that in a role that's not cameoing as a fullback in the Cotton Bowl. If he plays some on offense, I think that'd be pretty neat too. But I would like to see what the next step in his development is at defensive tackle, and what the actual level of depth will be for the Buckeyes there. Like, I think you can get away with paring down the rotation at end. I don't think it's as wise for the physical demands at defensive tackle. And Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton should not be asked to play 50 or 60 snaps in a game. I don't think that they will, because I think that Hero Kanu is right there. I think that Jason Moore, Tywone Malone can also contribute. I'm excited to see all of them. I'd love to know what that looks like, not just for getting through 2024, but also with an eye on 2025. The same thing that you're talking about when you don't have Tyleik and Ty anymore, what that all looks like. But you have to build for that now, and you also have to build to get through 15, 16, maybe 17 games. And asking those seniors to handle all of that is probably not fair at defensive tackle, probably not wise either. So I think out of that group, Caden McDonald is the one that I just can't tear my mind away from, but it's going to be all of them. But if I have to name one, it's Caden McDonald for Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. Again, we watched Tyleik Williams. I mean, I think he had more snaps than anybody on the defense last year in the front seven. So, like, you got to figure out a way to give him a break. And if you have Caden McDonald and Jason Moore and Hero Kanu ready to go, then all of those guys need to play. Caden is the guy that we've heard people just rave about over and over. So I understand the impetus. For me, the next thing is wide receiver. Brian Hartline has, I think, 5, maybe 6 guys that can play right now. I loved what we've seen out of Kojo Antwi in this offseason and this preseason and him developing. But to me, the guys that I really want to see are Brandon Ennis and Bryson Rogers, because in the last couple of years, while Ohio State has obviously been extremely top-loaded at wide receiver and exceptionally talented, there has been a comfort level that says, hey, we're just going to play these top 3 guys. And then rather than putting in wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, we're just going to rotate in more tight ends. We're going to do this and do that. Like, Bryson Rogers and Brandon Ennis have to play this year. They need to be regulars. They need to be, because part of that to me is that I want to see the offense not just revert to this Bill Landis fantasy of just run the ball 45 times a game. Like, I think Will Howard is going to be a Heisman candidate by the end of the season, as I've said repeatedly. And if that's the case, it's because he's going to have to throw the ball 25, 30 times a game and do it well. And I think with the way that you can deploy Brandon Ennis in somewhat, that Jackson Smith and Jigba-esque role where we thought about maybe in the backfield doing some slot stuff, I think you can get work done there. And Bryson Rogers, every time he's been on the field that we've seen him in the spring and in the preseason camp, he scores touchdowns. So just put him out there. And I get Brian Hartline's philosophy is if you can't block, you can't play. I'm not sure that I think that that's the way to go in the year 2024 because it's time to let kids see if they can sink or swim. And, you, again, similar to the Kenyatta Jackson discussion, but you were on the verge of having Bryson Rogers playing somewhere else this season. And you obviously believed that he was good enough to go out there and reel back in and not let him get away, which is not a prototypical Ohio State response in those situations. Generally speaking, their mantra is, go ahead and go. And that is not what they did with Bryson Rogers. So to me, that's an indicator that they want to see him make plays. So let's see it this weekend. Let's see him in the first and second quarter. Let's not just wait until the backup quarterback is in there and then those guys are the primary receivers. I want to see him with the ones.
I think the off-field story with Bryson Rogers is just as as fascinating to watch as him catching some of these long touchdowns, which we saw, the catch and run on a drag route in the Student Appreciation Day scrimmage in the spring. We saw the deep ball from Devin Brown during an open practice in training camp. Like, those are fun to watch. And he had the dunk through the goalposts, and I wrote about it and we all talked about it. That's great. But like, the intrigue of someone wanting to go elsewhere, and then whether that is like Ohio State, whether that's Bryson Rodgers, a combination of both coming back together and saying, hey, we never told you were going to play as a true freshman, and you probably shouldn't have expected that anyway. Like, this is part of the development plan. You were on board with that. And like, I'm not part of those conversations. You're not either. We sometimes hear about them, but like, the sign of maturity, and then the sign of maybe, I don't know, a new approach from the coaching staff, where, as you mentioned, like, if you're going to close the door, like, Ohio State will lock it behind you. That used to be the old approach. Not always, but generally speaking, we haven't seen a player go into the portal and then return. So that's new, and I think it bodes well for both sides, and that is why Bryson Rodgers was going to be that second pick for me as well. Just like, you're not going to keep Jeremiah Smith out for every single snap in September. You're not going to do that for Emeka Egbuka. It doesn't need to happen. You're not going to need to do that for Carnell Tate. Now, though, Carnell and Jeremiah Smith, I think, both need maybe more reps than a normal Ohio State starter would, because Jeremiah Smith has never played and Carnell Tate was injured despite playing a couple hundred snaps a year ago and not fully himself. So maybe they play more extensively than Emeka, but you still need to, I think, if you're Ohio State, and Ryan Day has talked about this throughout the offseason, getting through the length of the year, as many games as they're going to play, you have to share some of this load and get maybe back to the 6-7 wide receivers that Ohio State hasn't done for a couple of years. So that doesn't just mean Bryson Rodgers. That can also mean Mylan Graham. That could Jaden Ballard. Kojo Antwi had made a bunch of plays in training camp that maybe we weren't projecting when we got into it heading into August. But, I think of those guys, maybe it's the storyline with Bryson Rodgers, but it's also those touchdowns. They're hard to ignore. So can he carry that over? Is he asked to do some things as a blocker that, like, you look at his frame, maybe it doesn't naturally lend itself to thinking he's going to go be very good at that? That's the stuff that's going to be fun to watch on August 31st and beyond.
Yeah, and I don't have biological children, okay? So it's important that I say that before I make this point. I have seen a number of times on the internet and other places that people, when they teach their young children to swim, they just throw them into the pool, right? And then you figure it out. And sure, you're right.
We did not do that. I don't know who those people are. Sink or swim, though, I guess.
You're right there to grab them if they're flailing, okay? But if they figure it out on their own, that's pretty good too. So that's kind of the approach I'd like to see Ohio State start taking with its underclassmen and the freshmen and the guys that haven't played a lot. I get it at offensive line. That's a totally different conversation where, if you're out there and you don't do your job, you might get a quarterback, hurt or whatever. But if you're talking about a guy missing a block on the perimeter on a run play, it happens. I mean, it happens to veterans. So it's not like it's only going to happen to a guy that's not been out there. I saw Marvin Harrison miss more than his fair share of blocks. Saw Cade Stover miss his blocks. Like, it happens. So I just think it's something where the expectation can't be that someone has to be perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good in these circumstances, and let the guys get out there and see what they can do. And that does go for Mylan Graham. It does go for Jaden Ballard, who, we've seen Ballard enough in his career to kind of know what he's capable of when he gets the ball in his hands. But I'd like to see, obviously they want to see more consistency from him. And I don't think you can get more consistency if you're not out there to get it. So let's let it rip. Now, again, all this goes back to what I said on our show for Monday, which is Ohio State cannot take the foot off the gas in any game this year. I don't care who you're playing. I don't care what the score is. Doug made a great point about it on Kings of the North on Wednesday. The reality here is you're paying Akron almost $2 million to come in and get their asses kicked. Okay. So kick their asses. Don't be nice. Don't go into it. We gave them their money's worth. No, you're bringing these guys in there to let your team get its work in. So if you're putting in Julian Sayin at the beginning of the fourth quarter and all he's doing is handing the ball off, that's the wrong approach. And I don't think that sportsmanship should be considered a strength anymore when it comes to college football. Like, you can whip someone up and down the field without being rude about it. You know what I mean? But you don't have to steal bases when you're up 13-0. I get that. But if you're just running your offense and they can't stop you, that's on them, not on you.
Sometimes I think it's more disrespectful if you just stop playing in the middle of the third quarter.
I agree.
Right? Like,
and I think you're more prone to getting people hurt that way.
Right. Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I wasn't sure if I was going to agree with you, but you convinced me. And also I think of all the, like, some of the non-conference games that we would watch, some with Ryan Day at the start of his career, some with Urban Meyer, where it's like, if you just stop entirely, like, that's more disrespectful and it's more boring. And it's not even just about paying Akron $2 million to come and then but you also have 110,000 people there. You also have CBS paying a broadcast deal, and they want to be entertained.
Yeah.
I think that's,
and I get a lot of crap for talking about Ohio State fans who leave and like when games aren't over, but I kind of get it. The more you think about it, and if the Buckeyes aren't out there trying to do the things that they can do, why should the fans sit there and watch them hand the ball off for 18 straight minutes? Like, that's just not, that's not it.
Yeah.
Run them over.
And the whole premise of what we're talking about with these three things and these Buckeyes is like letting them get actual opportunities, because Ryan Day said this on Tuesday, because I asked about a new philosophy and playing depth and getting through the course of the year, things he's talked about all year. And like, he said, you go through camp and you make assumptions about who can do this, who can do that, who can play, who can not play, and you're going to learn. Are you going to learn if you don't actually run your normal offense, or if you don't run a normal defense, or if you're just trying to get through the game? Like, I do think he's made this point, and I hope that he lives up to it. I have no reason to think that he won't. He's generally, almost exclusively, a man of his word. And he said, you only get 12 of these opportunities guaranteed. And he would say a lot of those coaching cliches in the past, but then you'd get to the second half and be like, ooh, let's be careful here. Don't want to get hurt on this side. Don't want to hurt them. Don't want that coach to be mad. Not saying that's specifically what's going through his mind, but he has talked often about sportsmanship, and we know that Ohio State has not wanted to risk injury with its roster. And I'm not saying just go willy-nilly and like,
you can't be reckless
to win at all costs. I'm not suggesting being reckless, but like, there's probably more to learn by taking it deeper into a game, and more benefit than, simply protecting integrity, which again, you should do. Like, you don't want to be in the same boat as Michigan, where you have no integrity whatsoever and you become a laughingstock in college football. But, you can do it in a different way.
Well, there's no evidence that I'm aware of that supports the idea that players get hurt less when the game matters less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you're right.
You just put the guys out there and you let them play, and don't talk about it, be about it. That's basically the bottom line.
Give me a third guy.
Number 3. Now, I assume most of the conversation that we've had in the last month about the linebacker position is going to lend to the idea that I'm going to say Arvell Reese.
But you're not. You're going to say Peyton Pierce.
I'm going to say CJ Hicks because I think that athletically and potential-wise, CJ Hicks has as much as anybody on the roster. I believe, after what we got a chance to hear from him 2 weeks ago, that he is as confident as he has been since he's been at Ohio State. And I think it's somewhat, I don't want to say disappointing, but I imagine it is irritating / frustrating for him to hear conversations like he did on Tuesday, where it's like, there's talk about Arvell Reese, there's talk about Sonny Styles, there's talk about everyone else but him. Mm-hmm. And where Jim Knowles throws him in almost, I'm not going to say as an afterthought in discussing like the guys that he calls his ones, but it seems like it's like he's also the guy. He's always the guy that's like, oh, and also CJ Hicks. Oh, and also CJ Hicks. Like, go out there and, to steal the phrase from Ryan Day, leave no doubt, knock him out. Go out there and make plays. And that's, early bold peas prediction. So I'll get ahead of this for Friday. Is that CJ Hicks will have the most sacks on the team on Saturday, because I do believe he's going to have an impact early and often in this game. And I hope for his sake and his opportunity to really just put it out there for people to say, hey, this is what I'm capable of, that he does it and does it early. Because I think with a player like CJ, when he gets confident, everything else is going to start to click. And that's why, we saw him in the spring making plays over and over. And that's because it finally was like, hey, I'm going to get my chance. And when I get my chance, I'm going to take advantage of it. So now you have reps against a real team where you can go out there and actually hit somebody. And I think the best thing that CJ Hicks is going to do is hit somebody. So he's the linebacker I want to see early and often, and not just when the game is out of control on Saturday.
We got asked about this on basically every platform on Tuesday after Ryan Day said, well, Sonny Styles is going to be the starter, and he has separated. He's pulled ahead. He's got a margin there where he is clearly the will linebacker. And it was put in contrast with Jim Knowles saying, well, I consider CJ Hicks to be a starter for this team, which is like, I don't, and then we were asked why that was. Like, I think Jim Knowles clearly, maybe it's not to the level of 2 years ago, got to unleash CJ Hicks, which he said, and really gassed that up in a way that didn't play out and didn't come to fruition for the Buckeyes. Like Ryan Day sees a starting will linebacker, and I think that Sonny Styles is more capable of doing that on a play-in, play-out basis than CJ Hicks. That's my read of this conversation. But Jim Knowles, I think he can take a softer stance on that and word it differently, and maybe wants to word it differently, because he sees that there can be a role for CJ Hicks that doesn't require him to be an every down will linebacker. Will we see that? How much will we see that? I don't know if Akron is actually going to be the answer to that question, if how much we'll see. I think he's going to play a lot. He might play more snaps than Sonny Styles and Cody Simon in this game, because those two, if they are two the starters that separated, they may not need to. But I think that those can be really significant, because you and Bill have both made this point a lot over the last 2 years. How is CJ Hicks going to prove himself in game situations if he doesn't get them? And I understand the reticence to not put somebody out on the field before you have complete confidence and faith that they are ready for that role. I don't really take that much exception with it, but there were opportunities later in the game where those top tier starting linebackers did not need to be out there, where maybe those reps could have, I don't know if they would have, could have let CJ Hicks work through some of those issues, growing pains, whatever you want to call them, in before this point. But now that, like, you're in year 3, you have no choice. Like, you have to find out for sure what he can do, when he can do it, how much he can do it. Yeah. And this is a great opportunity for that.
Not every player is the same. And that's something I think people have to come to terms with when it comes to recruiting, developing, et cetera. Even not every 5-star is the same. So CJ Hicks's path is going to be different. CJ Hicks's, that's weird to say Hicks's, CJ Hicks, his abilities and his areas of strength are not going to be the same as the areas of strength of someone else. So a good coach finds a way to use all people's strengths. And I do think that James Laurinaitis, being the full-time position coach now at linebacker, having the decision-making process entirely in his hands about who's on the field, I think that will make it easier for us to get a true sense of where CJ Hicks is in the pecking order. Because I think at times Jim Knowles last year, especially because, you're still in his second year at Ohio State, the new guy coming in, I don't know that he's always comfortable speaking about the players, but as a guy that went through it and did it like James Laurinaitis did at Ohio State, I have not heard James pull a punch yet in anything we've ever heard him say in a press conference or off the record or on the record in any setting. So if CJ's not getting it done, we're going to know. And if CJ is going to get it done, but it's only in one specific niche area, then James Laurinaitis is going to find a way to use him in that niche. And I believe that will be the case. So I'm just looking forward to seeing him get a chance to show what he's best at and letting it be done on a regular basis. And that starts Saturday in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. It's a good pick. I don't really know how much rotation there's going to be on the offensive line. I'm expecting some, because I don't think that Donovan Jackson is going to play extensively against Akron. I think that there could be a situation where both Carson Hinsman and Tegra Shabola are out there at guard, but that's not really where I think the intrigue lies for me. I would like to know who the next tackle is that goes in the game. Let's just say that they get up big in the first half. I think that's not an outlandish expectation for this team against Akron. And you take Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer out. Is it Zen Mahalski? Is it George Fitzpatrick? Do they continue with looking at Austin Sareveld on the edge there, playing some tackle as we saw at times through training camp? I think the interior is going to work out just fine for Ohio State, and they can mix and match and do 4 or 5 different things. I'm not sure if that's true at tackle. So there have been really, really encouraging things about Austin Sareveld. I don't know where you come down on this berm, where it's like, you look at him, you don't necessarily think that he's got like tackle of the future profile, but it sounds like that's a real consideration. Justin Fry a week ago was talking very highly about Zen Mahalski, which, that's a normal development curve for a tackle in some ways. They're not all going to be Paris Johnson. So I will be watching to see what happens with the tackles. And then if you're still running the full offense and pass protecting, I think we could get some decent answers about what the depth is like for this year and what the future looks like at that position.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that anyone's going to look at Austin Sarabeld and see tackle. But I don't know that anyone who looks at Josh Fryer thinks tackle. So I don't know that necessarily matters. Ohio State's looking at the things like the arm length, like the footwork, like, that sort of stuff. Is if he's a fit there, if he's someone who can be a stopgap. I think he can be. I wonder if we will see any scenarios. We talked about it in the last week where maybe if Donovan Jackson starts this game and the Buckeyes get out up to an early comfortable lead, even when you have the rest of the starters and the offensive line out there, if maybe you put Carson Hinsman out there at the same time as Tegra Shabola and take Donnie off the field. I wonder if you could do something similar with Austin Sarabeld or Zen Mahalski if you keep Fryer out there and then you replace Josh Simmons for a series or two. I think that one of the problems I have with offensive line development and how generally it feels like guys don't get a fair shake is that when you're out there with 5 other guys who don't play. And that to me is a problem. I think like if you're going to put someone out there and you're going to replace Josh Simmons with Zen Mahalski or George Fitzpatrick or Austin Sarabeld or Miles Walker or Luke Montgomery or pick one, I don't care. Putting them out there with 4 other guys that don't have any experience, that guy's going to look bad in a vacuum. Like this is the way it's going to look. So I'd like to see them give those guys an opportunity to run with the other ones and then start to see if, hey, does this fit? My gut tells me that Austin Sarabeld may have elevated himself to be that next tackle. I don't have anybody at Ohio State who's confirmed that, but like, I don't think that it's an accident when Ryan Day and the coaches start talking about someone else or talking about a guy as much as they have with Austin. Right. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. The only problem with that, I guess, is that in the last week, Zen Mahalski's name got thrown around a lot more than we'd heard in a while. So I think they're both options for that. But again, my only hope is that we don't just see them out there with the second or third team offensive line. Like I don't want that. I think that's bad.
Yeah. Even if we do, it'll still be it'll be new information for all of us to see that in a game situation, which I think
not that Ohio State's second team offensive line shouldn't be able to whip Akron. Let's be clear.
That's also a fair point to make. There's going to be things to evaluate, which I am really looking forward to because this offseason has taken forever, but it's 2 days away from being definitively officially over in the Horseshoe, 3:30 against Akron. If you want to get ready even more, later tonight, Thursday night, weekend kickoff. We're teeing off the season at the Fairway Columbus, and Bryant Heating and Cooling Systems is back for another year. We're going to have several of these throughout the biggest home games of the year, and we're considering the season opener to be one of the biggest because we just can't wait to get back.
It's the most important game this week for sure.
There's no doubt about that. You're absolutely correct, partner. Zach Bourne and Michael Bennett will be there. Starting at 7, the Fairway Columbus is going to extend the happy hour. Berm, Bill, myself will all be there ready to talk about the Buckeyes. We'll have some season predictions, and then we'll get ready for kickoff there. Podcast Daily, of course, will be here for Freaky Friday. Kings of the North ongoing. Pre-game keys on Saturday. Whole deal. It's all back, baby. Game week is well underway. We are so close to kickoff. Can't wait to get there with you all. Thanks for joining us on the Podcast Daily with some 3 Things Thursday. He's Berm. I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.